All right, so it's just realized I didn't get the mic stuff, but so it's time for us to begin. If you want to go ahead and turn over in your Bibles to Judges chapter 19, that's where we're going to be tonight. And I appreciate again Daniel swapping with us as we're going to be out of town next week. But I think have some ambitions tonight to finish Judges. We've got 3 chapters and would like to reserve some room at the end for a couple things. So we'll be moving along pretty good tonight, I think, with some of these things. So Stacy, if you don't mind leading us in a word of prayer, we'll get started.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day that you give to us. All the wonderful blessings that you provide. We ask, Father, that you continue to provide your many blessings for us. Lord, we ask that you be with Danny and be with the lesson that he's prepared for us tonight. Be with us and let us have all hearts. Take your word and apply it to our lives. Lord, we ask that you be with us all once again. Forgive us mercy. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. All right, so like I said, we're starting in Judges chapter 19 tonight, 19, 20, and 21 to finish up this book. And I got to tell you, this is one I've kind of struggled with in terms of a lesson because it's some terrible chapters in the Bible. I think it's one of these sections in the Bible that there's not many you could point to and call worse in a lot of ways. So there's a lot that's going on with this. It's been the kind of the direction we've been going with Judges for a while with some of these things. And if we kind of look at just the outline that we've kind of been going back to over and over again in this, is, we started with that double introduction where there's sort of these 2 sections at the beginning of Judges. The first section deals with the idea of that social decline, a lot of things that they didn't do. They weren't able to drive out all kinds of people that God wanted them to. And then we get in that second introduction that kind of piece of the religious decline, that the reason behind some of these things is they weren't serving God. They weren't doing the things that they were supposed to, and they were getting into these judges cycles. We spent a lot of time in the cycles themselves over and over again, the things that were happening with that. And then we've been last Sunday, and tonight we're in that double conclusion kind of thing where on Sunday we looked at the Levite, Micah and the Levite that was there, and all the religious things that they were getting wrong, right? That they were still worshiping God in a way, but all the worship was corrupt. All the worship was against what God was telling them to do. And we're going to see kind of an echo of some of those things in this sort of second narrative that we'll look at tonight. That the same way that the story sort of escalated, it's going to escalate again. But it's going to be all about moral depravity, moral collapse. The society is really collapsing around Israel. And it's going to start with infidelity, and it's going to end with civil war and rape, and murder, and all these kind of things in this story. So the way I'd like to try to tackle tonight is I'm going to try to really police myself in terms of time. So we're definitely not going to read everything through some of this, but I want to spend about 15-ish minutes, and the ish is my carve out, right, to do whatever I want. But about 15 minutes on chapter 19. Chapter 20 and 21, another 15 plus minutes on that, and then really try to reserve some time to talk about Judges as a whole. Where does it fit into the Bible and those kind of things? Because it really does end on a low note. So what does that tell us? What does that point to? Those kind of things, I want to open that up for some, it's Wednesday night, so we need some discussion questions in there. So that's the general plan. All right, so I do want to hit kind of an outline, a little bit of what's happening in chapter 19. Hopefully everybody got a chance to read or listen through this one before tonight. But chapter 19 really deals with Gibeah's heinous crime. There's really no other way to describe some of the things that happen that begin in chapter 19. But probably the least offensive thing, if you want to call it that, in some of these things is going to start out with there's an unfaithful concubine that happens, and then there's this reconciliation in their marriage that comes at the beginning of this chapter, and they begin a trip home, right? She goes away for a while. They're going to begin a trip home, and then things go terribly wrong on this trip. We're going to see Gibeah's sin and what that means in this chapter, and then news of all these things that happen spread at the very end of this chapter. So that's really what chapter 19 looks like in some of this. I do want to read a chunk of this one as we go through the first 4 verses. Does anybody mind being a reader as we get started this morning? Or no, evening? I got to switch my language.
In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. And when she brought him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with them 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there.
Okay, just kind of setting the scene. So we're introduced to this Levite. This is not the same Levite that we were talking about on Sunday that comes into place, but he has a wife. He has his concubine that he has, and she's apparently unfaithful to him. Is the way that this story starts out. That's just kind of a fact. As we go through this, she ends up leaving and she goes to her father's house, and she's there for some time. In some of this, there is a little bit of question in terms of that word that's used there. I guess there's just kind of a question. It's the only time this word's used in the Old Testament. So there is a little. Sometimes you might see something that she's angry. People have talked about that. There's a couple translations that do that. By and large, everybody says from the context, the context we're talking about, people tend to agree. She was unfaithful. She's there. The father-in-law is very happy to see him when he comes to reconcile. But that's the scene that we open up to with this. And when he goes there to meet his wife, at this point he stays there 3 days. Is what we see in some of these things, but it's not done. And this is kind of the catalyst to the beginning of the story here. I'm not going to read this page 5 through 9, and I'd encourage everybody to kind of have their Bibles out for this one if you want to skim and look at some of these things. But the father-in-law really encourages him to stay, right? Stay with us, make your heart merry, stay in our house for a while. There's no rush, those kind of things. He stays for a 4th day. The father-in-law kind of insists, and they begin the same sort of process. On the 5th day, he was going to leave in the morning, but he keeps staying, he keeps staying, he keeps staying. So by this point, it's the 5th day that he's there, and it's getting late into the afternoon, and this is when he decides to leave. So they're not going to make it all the way back home, but they start this journey anyway. Is the things that happen with this. And then I've got a big bold don't read. I had to go back and trim some of these out, right? In this, so 10 through 15, we get into this. The man didn't want to spend the night. He says, I'm going to leave today. It's this 5th day. And as he goes through this, they passed opposite of Jabus, which would be Jerusalem, right? But at this time, if you guys remember chapter 1, the Benjamites, at the time, they were not able to, I think around verse 34, something like that, in chapter 1, they were not able to drive out these Jebusites from this area. So this is a foreign kind of town. And the man says, you know what, I'm not going to stay in a foreign town. It's too dangerous. We're not going to stay in this place. We're going to keep moving on. I want to stay in an Israelite town. So that sets the stage for some of these things. I don't want to stay in this foreign town. I want to stay in this Israelite town. And then they made it to the town. They actually made it to Gibeah. They were debating between Ramah and Gibeah. And when they got there, they went to the town square. And one of the things I think to know about these kind of times is hospitality was big. Hospitality was a big part of what happened. There were not hotels and inns in the same way that we think about that now. So what people used to do is go to the town center, and then people would invite them back to their house. But by this time, it's getting pretty late. Nobody's invited them to their house at this point. But there is a man that came from the hill country of Ephraim, which in the context of this means he's not a guy from this town in that way. But he comes in from out of the fields. He sees these people that are staying there. He asks about them, right? What are you doing here? Where are you from? Those kind of things. And he says, I'll care for you. I'll provide for your needs. And he says something pretty ominous, too. Only don't spend the night in the square. First kind of clue we get that something's not right. Something's not good in this kind of sense. But he brought him back to his house, and they begin to eat and drink, and they're at the house. He's showing them hospitality as he does those kind of things. So I do want to read this next part. It's one of these. I'll go ahead and read it. It's 2 pages, kind of as we go through here. And then what I want to do from there is kind of take that text, put it down, and then just talk for a minute about the different people in this story as we see them for this one. So beginning in verse 22. And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door, and they said to the old man, master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. Behold, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now, violate them, and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized the concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master arose up in the morning, and when he opened the door of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, get up, let us be going. But there was no answer. And then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. It's a terrible scene. There's so much bad stuff, right, in this story. And I'll frame it this way in some of these things. I truly believe these stories that we're talking about, the last one and this one, the real purpose of some of these things is to say, how bad did it get? This is how bad it got. And there's another piece of this kind of text where I think sometimes we kind of know the stories in the Bible. We kind of get used to them that are around us and these kind of things, if we've read these kind of things before. Man, if you just imagine anything close to modern day and hearing about something like this that comes up maybe on the news or something like that, terrible, terrible stuff that's happening in Israel. People that were supposed to be God's people. So I do want to, I didn't ever click that, did I? Okay. I do want to open this up for conversation in some of this, but let's talk about this from the perspective of looking at the different people in the story, and we'll kind of march through them a little bit. But if you're looking at your Bibles and looking up here at this kind of stuff, what do you guys, any comments about this men of the city? Anything you'd say about them, what they're doing? Yeah, buddy.
It's like Sodom and Gomorrah all over again.
Man, it's a lot like Sodom and Gomorrah. That is huge in this story. And I don't think it's by accident that this story is picked. If you think about this, actually the reason I brought this book, I found this guy put a really nice chart together of some of the similarities and things like that. But what are the similarities? Or Daniel, do you have something else you want to say?
Oh, yeah, it's just something else that I noticed is they're called worthless men in the reading that we did, but later, it's interesting, they're identified as the leaders of the city. Like if you go into Judges 20, that's really striking.
Yeah. In that particular place where they call them the leaders of the city is really interesting to me too, because that's a Levite telling this story. And it is interesting the way he tells that story when he gets to that too, because he kind of leaves out the worst parts about himself, by the way, in that story. But yeah, you get this, you see why this went around like a gunshot, right? This story that happened. But what are the similarities between Sodom and Gomorrah? By the way, if you're looking at it, it's actually pretty easy to remember. Genesis 19, Judges 19. Those are the two accounts of these cities. But anything strike anybody about that reminds you about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? Art and then Daniel. Yeah.
It's just that they were travelers being taken care of by someone else, and also the men came from all over the city.
Yeah. Super similar in scenes, right? They started in the town square. At that time, it was angels, and Lot was the one taking him in. That happened. This was this man of Ephraim, and this Levite and his wife were in this picture. The worthless men are both in this. Both of the hosts at least start out resisting, if you want to call it that, in this sort of way. They both offer. Lot offered his daughters. These men offered his daughter and this concubine. What do you think about that?
It's hard for us to wrap our minds around that in our society today. But hospitality was it was a almost sacred thing to them, to the point that they were willing to make this offer. And it still doesn't make it right,
Yeah.
but that's just how they treated it. It was that sacred of a thing to them. Like, don't do this to the people we're showing we put our protection on. And it's still a custom in the Middle East today.
Yeah. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. Like all of these things, the offer, the men of the city, the whole situation that's happened. And here's I've seen an argument before that that this time was even worse, because when it came to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels, they drug Lot out and they got him out of the city and they struck them blind. But you know what one of the key differences is of this story in here? Now, the Levite, this person that's supposed to be one of God's people, he's the one that forces his wife out into the streets for these kind of things. And they both end in the city's destruction and those kind of things. So, yeah, Heath.
So that was something I was going to ask you about, is who you actually felt like forced her out. Because you get kind of, or when I read it, I get kind of mixed up with the old man, the man, then old man is referred to as man, and it just says the man took his concubine. Are we talking about old man took man's concubine, or man took his own concubine and sent her out? Because I read it.
I'll also put it this way: I've never read anything. The stuff just getting ready for this. It's probably a good question, and we'll look at it. I've never seen anybody take the position it was the man from Ephraim's wife, or that he did the throwing. I've never seen anybody take it as they took the throwing. I kind of took it for granted, to be honest. Through here, you got me wanting to look at it more specifically, like the words in there. But everything I've seen has been it's the Levite.
That's what I've always
that does the pushing.
That's what I've heard too. But the first time I read it, I was like, I think old man did it.
Yeah.
Regardless, it's terrible.
Yeah. And it is messy. Like this whole thing's just messy, right? Because of how terrible it is. What do you think about the the man from Ephraim? He knew something was going on. He's the one that said, "Yeah, but don't stay in the square." again, it's just interesting on some of these things. Man, 7:20. Levite. Anything you want to? What? Let me ask you this. What is the worst part to you about the Levite?
Indifference.
And why would you say indifference, by the way?
Because you could have said, no, that's my life, don't do that.
Yeah.
Seemingly.
Yeah.
Whether it was the old man putting him out or him, it's just,
There's so many terrible. I'm going to say that's the wrong answer because it's not the one I'm thinking of. But there's so many to choose from. Darlene and then Buddy.
Just no value, and it could have been just the women at that time, just had no value. He could actually sleep
Yeah.
and wait till the morning,
Yeah. I think that's some of the worst part to me, Buddy.
I want to go all the way back to 4 months that he waited to go get her from her father, who didn't do anything about anything himself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if she's unfaithful, you kind of see this element of time.
There's a lot of failings at every turn.
Every turn, it compounds. Danielle and then Heath.
I'm just piggybacking on what Darlene said, that for him to open the door after sleeping all night and be like, get up and let's go, even though you can visibly see she has been beaten and,
He didn't wait up at night. He wasn't peering over the wall or out the window. And you know what it said in there? Is it said, this to me is the worst part, is that, okay, he didn't wait up. All of this is terrible. All of it is terrible. But the worst part to me is that when he got up to go on his way, what was he going to do if she wasn't there? I don't think he expected her to be there. But he looks down and says, get up. It's time to go. He's treating her like property. Even the fact that she's a concubine, all that kind of stuff plays into some of this. Yeah, Heath. What about the concubine? Anything anybody wants to say about her? She gets the terrible side of this. Horrible piece of these kind of things. But even the most sympathetic person in the story looks like is also not an innocent person. It's just terrible things at every single turn is this story. And this is the beginning. So when we look, I'm just going to go through an outline. I don't even have the text up here for chapters 20 and 21. But you can kind of take this story of these two chapters and you can kind of split it into 3 sections. Chapter 19 is that first section. And again, the story is how bad did it get? How bad did it get in these kind of things? And chapter 20 is civil war against Benjamin. So as we're going through some of these things, the first couple of verses, this story goes through the nation, and it really mobilized the people. And they met at Dan and Beersheba. Dan, we talked about last week, right? Same with this idol center and everything else that's there. And they bring 400,000 people there. More people in Israel than we've read about any other time in the book of Judges, by the way, that are assembling because of these things. And they hear the Levite's testimony, and he puts a little bit of a favorable spin on himself. I think when he tells those kind of things, he leaves some things out about how these things happen. But they make a decision to go to war, and they make a vow that they will not return home until they punish the city in these things. And they take 10% of all those people is kind of the idea. They take 1 in 10, 10 in 100, 100 in 1,000. And they go on their way with some of these things. And that's first 11 verses. And then called it failed diplomacy. I don't know if you call it diplomacy. They came with an ultimatum in verse 12 and 13. And they say, give us these men. They went to Benjamin and said, give us these men that we can execute them, is essentially what they say. The amazing thing to me is in verse 14, the Benjaminites say, no. We're not going to give you the men of this city. And the people of Benjamin armed themselves for war with 26,000 people, and including a kind of interesting detail, 700 elite left-handed slingers, which I think is interesting detail, against the 400,000 men. When we get to verse 18 through 25, we're going to see the first 2 days of battle that goes in here. And this is super interesting, and I'll read verse 1 and 2 from Judges chapter 1, by the way, first. And then I want to read the beginning of this in verse 18. But Judges chapter 1 and verse 2, because this is very reminiscent of it. After the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites and fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. And then Judges chapter 20 and verse 18, really kind of similar thing. That reminds it and highlights some differences too, I think. The people of Israel rose up and went to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. And then, when they did, Benjamin struck down 22,000 Israelites. Do you notice anything missing in the second one in the text? God told them they were going to have a victory in chapter 1. This time he just said, Judah should go. 22,000 people slain. Yeah, buddy.
It's interesting, if I'm not mistaken, in Numbers, when they set out, like all the tribes have to set out in order. Judah is first. Judah sets out first.
Like in the book of Numbers kind of thing, when they left camp? Okay.
Judah sets out first, so it's interesting, God's like, you could go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. But it's very symmetric, right, in the book of Judges.
But also I have a question. How long after this is Saul king? Because he's a Benjamin.
So big debate is the short answer, right? So people debate about the dates of Judges a lot, but in general, right, Saul comes in the next page, if you want to put it that way, right? We get Ruth and Esther and that kind of thing, or no, not Ruth. But we get into 1 Samuel is the next thing in the narrative, right, for that kind of thing. But not necessarily chronological order with the Judges. But I will say this. I'll mention this now because I'm afraid I won't mention it later. So in the last story, remember how we mentioned Moses in it? That we're talking about Jonathan, who was the son of Gershom, which was Moses' son. So we were talking about a Levite who was Moses' grandson. In this story, we're going to find out through in chapter 20 that this is Aaron's grandson. This Levite the priest that's in Shiloh is Aaron's grandson. This is 2 generations away when we're talking about these things. But day 2, though, they went into battle. They did the same thing. They asked God, should we go? Who should go up against again? And they said Judah should go. Same kind of thing happened. 18,000 were slain. Then we see Israel has kind of a repentance that goes on here. After the second day, we've seen all these many thousands of people that died. They did offer to God. They went to God with a different kind of approach. And they even asked him, should we go up and go? And this third time, God answered them, Judah should go up against them, and I will give them into your hand. They come up with this plan to ambush them. The plan is pretty simple. They're going to go and act like it's just like the last 2 days where they went up to fight, and then they were going to retreat just like they were doing before, and then there'd be a bunch of guys behind the city, and they start setting fire to the city. That's the plan for the ambush. And that happened. They fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And when the Benjaminites look back, their town is on fire. They're destroying the city. They kill all of these men. And remember, they had 26,000. 25,000 died that day. Apparently, something like 400 have died in the last couple of days in terms of those odds. And when we get to the end of this right here, there are 600 men left of the whole tribe in this. So Israel has a change of heart. And they start mourning in chapter 21 all the things that are going on, that there's a crisis now because of the 12 tribes, now there is a missing tribe. 600 people, and they made a vow when they went into to battle that none of the people, they would be accursed if any of them ever gave their daughters in marriage to a Benjaminite. So here's 600 men, there are no women, all of them have given their vows to this, and they decide to solve these things again for themselves. So they have the crisis that's in there. So they come up with loophole number 1 in their own thinking. And loophole number 1 is, well, we also promised to kill anybody that didn't come help us. So because they were sad of how many people they killed of Benjamin, they thought, we know what we're going to do. Now they don't have wives, and we can't give wives of our daughters. So the perfect plan to do is find out who didn't go to battle, and we'll kill all the men, take all the women, and we'll give them to to the Benjaminites. So that's what they did. They kill all the women, and they kept the virgins, and they gave them to the men, but they still had a problem because that was only 400. So now 600 men, 400 women, there's 200 left. They decided to go on their own and work through this again. So they come up with loophole number 2. And this stuff sounds made up, by the way, when you read some of these kind of things in there. They said, well, we still got that oath. None of us can give it. But they need Israelite women. We still need 200. So they came up with a plan at Shiloh, which is where where the tabernacle was at this point in history. And they said, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. And they talked to the men of Benjamin, and they said, you know what? We can't give it, but we want you to wait because there's going to be dancers that come by for this festival to the Lord. Don't know exactly what this festival was that they were doing, but there's this festival to the Lord, and you should kidnap 200 women. And we will protect you against the families that come after you after that. We'll protect you for that. We'll strong arm them and to doing this. So, but if you steal them, then we didn't give them to you. But don't take our daughters. Take them from some other people in this way. So that's what they do. And they find that loophole at Shiloh. And then that's when we get this summary statement at the end of the book. This is what takes us to the end of the book. And I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't just sat down and read this. But would somebody mind, Buddy, would you mind reading the last part of this, the book of Judges? Just this page, yeah.
And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. And they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Yuck. Right? Is this picture that's in here? Does anybody want to make a comment about the stories kind of through there? I didn't know how to do it other than just going through the outline, right? Because there's just so much stuff in there. And again, if you haven't read it, read through it and think about these things that are in there. Yeah, Darryl?
I was going to say, do you think that it was the injustice towards the concubine or the Levite that caused that?
I'll say it this way. I think the Levite treated her like property. She was listed in with like donkeys and that kind of stuff anyway. But by the way, one of the other things that about the text that I think is changing, they calls him like their husband and that kind of thing when he's at the father-in-law's house. But when after he shoves her out, there's a switch in the text and it calls him the master. Calls him the master after that, after about verse 26 or something in chapter 20. There's a shift in that kind of language that's there. But I think he's treating them like property. No one is treating anybody like they should. Anybody in some of these kind of things. And I want to spend some time with that statement. You know, everybody did, or there was, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We've seen this statement before. It bookends these two stories. It's in between the story that we covered on Sunday. And I want to take a page from Daniel's book because it is Wednesday. And I also told Leah, I can't just stop there and end. Like that. It's such a downturn on some of the things with the books of Judges. I feel like we got to talk for a minute about the context of this book to wrap things up, because it really is depressing, right? And looking at some of these kind of things, that here is Israel, and morally and spiritually, in just a short amount of time, couple generations in these stories, they're acting worse than the Canaanites, worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the picture of the book of Judges. I think that's in there. So I want to look at, I got too many discussion questions. I'm sure we'll run out of time. So I feel pretty good about leaving 11 minutes. I'm proud of myself. I was afraid it was going to be 2 in some of these things. But I want to ask some of these questions and see what you guys think about some of this. But like this last statement that's in here, what is significant about the statement, there is no king in Israel? Buddy and then Daniel?
Well, they rejected God because God was their king.
Yeah. I think Deuteronomy, I think it's 35. I meant to look this up. 33, 35, somewhere in there. God talks about, I'm king of Jeshurun. right? He's king of Jerusalem, another name for Israel in the Bible. But yeah, he was to be their king. He's not their king right now. What's the other way this gets meant? There's literally no king right now, too, right? But ultimately, it's such a lack of leadership in any way about what they should be. Any other thoughts on this one?
No unity as people.
No unity. I think that kind of goes with this one, right? You know, the significance behind the statement, right in their own eyes. What do you think about that statement, right in their own eyes?
Their ways weren't God's ways.
Yeah. You know, everybody in each of these stories was acting in a way that they thought was right in their own eyes. It's pretty wild to think about for me. And I think it kind of, you know, puts these statements together, right? But these are linked, right? They're right there next to each other. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In that absence of leadership, in that absence of God as being the standard, the big picture of Judges, I think, is everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and it was terrible. Judges is this huge experiment that cost a lot of lives and a lot of souls, that basically said, what happens if we do it our way? What happens if we do it the way we want to do? And by the time we get to the end of the book of Judges, it's awful. It's things that we can't imagine. It's things that the people in the time of Judges had a hard time imagining happening. They said nothing like this has ever happened since the Exodus in some of these things, but they happened. And how can some of the most terrible things in this world happen? Judges is kind of a key to that. We've talked about that before as being sort of like this black box, right? This is the story of how it happened. How did it get that bad with some of these kind of things? Any other comments with like this one? Yeah, Darryl.
You know, one of the things that the first two times they went to God and prayed before they attacked Benjamin, and God says, go against it, you know. But they were defeated 2 times, even though God said to go. And there's no explanation why that was.
I think it's interesting they ask a different way the third time. And the third time when they go up, the first thing, they mourned, they sacrificed, and then they asked God a little bit different question, and they said, should we go up? And one of the things I think is different about that was when they asked God the first time, they came in and they knew what they were going to do, and they just said, God, who should go first? And I think they were checking boxes and going through some of this, but I think there's a little bit of difference in some of those kind of things. But God uses Benjamin to punish them and them to punish Benjamin. You see God working in these things in that kind of way. And it's super, super messy, super interesting how all those things kind of play out. What do you guys think about the message of the book of Judges? Talked a little bit about it from that kind of perspective. Do you guys see maybe different things? Or even say this, except for just the chronological order kind of stuff, does the book of Judges itself change things in the Bible for you? How does it fit in the Bible? What do you think about those kind of things when it comes to Judges, buddy?
You can see that at the beginning, all the way at the beginning, Genesis, it's a peak until they sin, and then it's the mountain. And then the whole Bible just keeps going up and down and up and down. And this is the lowest, one of the lowest that they ever go down. And then you get to David, they're up again. And then they go down, and you get to Josiah, they're up again. And it's too late.
Yeah.
It's down again. And then you get to Jesus, you're up again.
Yeah.
It shows us that God is here always. And if you do what you're supposed to, it's going to be up the whole time. If you take it upon yourself, it's down.
Yeah. Darlene?
I guess it's kind of like what he said, as humans, we need God as our king, and we need to do what's right in his eyes.
Yeah. I think if there was one thing that, oh, go ahead, Jordan. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, I think it's, as far as Judges is concerned, you know, it's a warning to God's people, it's a warning to us, that we're one generation away from not knowing God, and 2 generations away from that.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, a big one. for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I tell you what, if you don't read Judges and think about your kids, man, it's hard not to for me. Daniel?
One of the big things that comes out of it for me is that we can't just use a partial standard and be like, that's gonna be enough, that's gonna be good enough. Because that's what they were doing, is they had some elements of God still in their life, and that they hadn't, in most cases, completely just abandoned God. They still had part of that in their life, but they still went horribly wrong because they weren't adhering to God's full standard. So it's not enough to just do some of it.
Yeah. And I like thinking about it this way too. I think the book of Judges really does point to Christ in a way. And the reason I say that is the book of Judges says if man's left to himself, it goes downhill fast and it's terrible and the ends are not good. So there is a king that we're looking for ever since the book of Judges. And you know what? We get to the United Kingdom and we don't really find that person, right? You get to the divided kingdom, it gets a little bit worse and all these kind of things. And it's not until Christ comes that there is a righteous king. There is a standard that holds to these things. Everything else doesn't measure up. Yeah, Daryl.
There's a theological message too. One of the amazing messages of it is, this is the worst that humanity gets, but God didn't give up on it. You know, he still would respond to them. He still was trying to help.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I think it is. The mercy of God is amazing in the book of Judges when you think about all the things that happen for some of this stuff. I won't dwell too much on this one because I want to get to a couple other ones, but you think about when did Israel first go wrong? If you go back to chapter 1, chapter 2, man, it started with compromise. And that's one of the scariest things to me in the book of Judges, is it started small. I think the first thing that really jumps out to me in chapter 1 and verse, I don't remember, sorry, maybe verse 18, 19, somewhere in there, in chapter 1, is that they went up against some people in some chariots of iron, and they weren't able to take it because they were fearful, because they scared, even though God told them he would be with them in those kind of things. But it started with compromise in chapter 1, and it ends with civil war at the end of these things. We talk about how important is the next generation. Jordan, I think answered that as good as anything in there is, man, we are one generation away from these things and 2 from Judges. That's is the picture that we see for here. What do we learn about God's people in the book of Judges? Some not good people. That comes into play. And then, I tell you, going through the book of Judges, that's so small, isn't it? It's interesting to read this, but we think about Hebrews chapter 11. This has been on my mind kind of the whole class, right? Where he's going through all these things by faith, by faith, by faith. In verse 32, and what more shall I say, for time would fail to me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah. They're listed in here with words like faith in some of these kind of things. And I think it tells us a lot about God because, man, we know the faults of Jephthah. We know these faults of Samson that were in here. And how can they be mentioned in some of these things? And one of the things I think we learn about God in relationship to this, I think it comes out a lot in Judges chapter 10, where God was looking at these people, and they've been over and over again into these cycles, over and over and over again. And at one point, he looks at them and says, therefore I will save you no more. And the people mourn and they weep after they had cried out because God wasn't saving them. And then they turn themselves to the Lord. And I think this is an amazing statement in like verse 16. So they put away their foreign gods among them and served the Lord. He became impatient over the misery of Israel. With all the things that happen and all the messy lives that are on this earth, I'm so thankful that God is impatient with the misery of Israel. And that's a picture of mercy, I think, in some of these things. We're basically out of time. Does anybody want a last comment or anything? In class? Well, thanks for the time and the study. I really appreciate the opportunity to look at some of these things. Some of these things are heavy pieces, right, in these stories that are here. But hopefully we'll take those to heart. Hopefully I didn't get too much in the way of these kind of stories, and we live our lives for God. So appreciate all the time. Thanks again.